Gunnar, welcome to the podcast. Fresh off of a wedding. How are you feeling? A married man now.
Oof, it's an amazing feeling. Super fortunate to have just every person that I wanted at the wedding show up, and honestly, the commitment I made to my now wife is that much easier, just having a ton of support and a lot of love coming in. So being able to reflect on that has just been everything I could imagine, and then 10 times more than I could imagine. It's just been amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. We briefly were talking before, and what was the wedding? A week ago, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, it was on the 28th, so we're like, almost a week and a half
Yeah, a
fully
week and a
out.
half. And I can kind of sense it in your body. It's still like landing in your system. It's integrating.
Oh, for
It's
sure.
How long have you guys been together?
We were just like over 4.5 years, getting closer to 5 years.
Yeah.
As we got married. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm always curious, and maybe it's really soon, but like, does anything feel different? You've been with someone for a long time. I imagine I've even talked to friends who are somewhat recently engaged, and they're like, it kind of feels the same. Like, we knew it was going this direction, but I'm curious for you. Like, is there anything like in your system, in your body, where you're like, oh wow, this feels a little different?
That's a great question. I go back to when I asked my wife's dad for permission, and that was the most nerve-wracking day of my life. Like, I was sitting there, it was just him and I hanging out all day, and man, like, everything in my body was just vibrating, and I couldn't tell if it was fear, if it was just like hesitation, like, this is for life, like going into all of these things. And as soon as I asked that question, my body just dumped. Like, it was just like, oh, good, we're here. And then that same feeling came back up before our first look, and I was like, okay, this is now the sign for me. I'm doing the right thing. This is the direction I'm supposed to be going in, and this is absolutely the person I'm committing to, I'm loving, and I'm also, showing up as my best self, and I get a lot of that play. So to answer the question in a kind of roundabout way, what's changed? Not all that much in my day-to-day. However, it's now I have this opportunity to carry around something on my hand for the first time ever, and I get to look at Katie as, we have this beautiful opportunity to create a life now together, fully together.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that you mentioned this, like, knowing. It sounds like your intuition. This is a conversation that has come up a lot on my podcast with previous guests. I think people who are in the personal growth space, spiritual, like wanting to better themselves, at some point you start to develop this relationship with like your gut, with your intuition, with your knowing. And so it's cool that it's like you knew, like you were confident is what I heard, but then it was just like this feeling of like when you asked her dad, or like when you saw her for the first time, you're like, yeah, this is it. Like, this is the right sense. And so I'm curious, anything for you to share on your intuition, like your relationship with that. Has that something you've cultivated? Is that something you've always been in touch with? Because it sounds like you're really aware in this time in your life.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement there about intuition and just the awareness. I've always had this like understanding of who I am and how I show up, but also what I want to experience. And when I first met Katie, I was an athlete coming from college hockey into CrossFit and competing at really high levels, and coaching all the time, and just being in it all the time, knowing like what my body's doing, what's all this. And she's a registered dietitian. She's a sports dietitian. So we both come from this place of like fitness and health being a massive cornerstone in our lives. Our first date, we both committed to not talking about fitness because we wanted to see if there was more there. And
real quick, I just got to say, we'll probably dive into this, but as a CrossFitter, that's really challenging. That's impressive. So I love that you did that.
Thank you. Yeah, it was something like we both went into the first date knowing of each other, knowing like, all right, this is how we spend a lot of our time. However, we were both in a place where we were ready to make a commitment to a relationship and wanting, family, wanting all these new experiences. And fitness it's still there. We're almost 5 years in together, and it's always been there. We've taught each other a lot. However, that first date was just like, we immediately felt each other. Like, we can go to a museum and just be nerds for a while. We can go dancing and just be, goofy and learn and new to stuff. We can also talk shop on like physiology and, all these different topics, and but also family too. Like that was a big thing. I think when we avoided or made the intention not to talk about fitness, it allowed us to really get into, what does it mean to have a relationship? What is our experience from our parents, our grandparents, and how we're integrating that for ourselves.
Yeah, so this is like even pulling. I'm loving this. We're like pulling the layers back even deeper. It sounds like you had discernment and clarity on what you desire, and this is something. I think this idea of purpose, or like, where are we going? Like, what is my path? Is something that a lot of people are really struggling with, or will struggle with at some point in their life. And especially, we met at a men's retreat, and that's something that men are looking for. And I think that often, when we don't have that, that's when we get distracted. We numb out, we avoid things, we don't show up our fullest self. And so, like, it sounds like there's this connection to awareness of like, oh, how does this feel in my body? Like, does this feel in alignment, not necessarily good or bad, but like right? And then from that, you also had clarity on like what you wanted to be able to like direct the conversation or like focus on your importance, especially in relationships. This comes up a lot with my clients. And even myself, like previous in relationships, I definitely have a tendency of like being a nice guy or like a people pleaser because I wasn't really clear on what I wanted. So it's like, oh yeah, you're interested in that, I could be interested in that. So yeah, how did you get to that point? Like, have you always been pretty clear, pretty intentional of like, okay, this is what's true for me, I'm going to stay on that? Or was it learned? Was there a pivotal experience?
On the relationship side, I was definitely seeking a partner that could match my intensity in any realm for a long time. And I come into now being married from a very different path than my wife. I was the first person she dated. I dated a lot of people and, learned a ton from it. And I think it was just that constant reminder, like, okay, this is a good thing. I learned a lot from this other person. What do I still want to pursue? And continuing to, I don't want to like bash anyone, but the idea of like, okay, this isn't the right person for me, and being intentional about that. And as soon as I met Katie, it was instant. Like our first 5 minutes together was like, okay, we're very comfortable together. We already know this feeling is there. How deep can we go? And as you were mentioning too, like I've always felt very connected to my purpose, whether that was training, sports, school, and then relationships. And I would give everything that I had to all of it, all the time. And maybe that's a fault. Some people might look at me and like, man, he's giving everything all the time. Maybe he's not really thinking about it. I was always thinking about it, probably overthinking most of the time. And yeah, it's led me now to just be in a place of, okay, I have this amazing mirror sitting across from me every day. I can tune her up. She can tune me up in the same ways, because we both come at it from our own really intentional, intuitive purpose of being a great partner, being healthy, being consistent, being committed.
Yeah, that's so cool, because I find a lot of times, I've done this in the past, and people that I've coached and worked with, like we create our own suffering by self-abandoning of like what we desire, like we having these boundaries, and especially I think relationship is one of the biggest, where it's like we get caught up in this idea of like, oh, will I find someone, or like could we be a match, and we start to be like, oh well, like I could be okay with that, or I could be okay with this, or I could show up this way, before ever really defining it for themselves. And actually, usually when we're like very clear and concise, one, we're not wasting time, not that you have to be like, I think in relationship, there's got to be a common ground, like a meeting point with another person. And this is not just romantic relationships, friends, coworkers, family, because you're not going to be like perfectly synced on everything. And also like, I think life could be a little boring that way. But you have like your non-negotiables and like what you desire. And then you have like, okay, like this is where I'm flexible. And we get caught up in that fear loop. And instead, if you're actually like, this is what I desire, this is what I'm looking for, you can find someone to match that frequency. And so I really, really love the question. It's from what I'm hearing from you, it's not like, oh, could this be the person? Is this right? It's like, oh, how deep can we go? Like, I'm not even going to entertain the idea unless it's a person where that's the question I'm asking. It's like, oh, like the depth is the entry point, right? It's like the ticket to get inside. And if there's not depth already, like we're not even having the conversation. But then it's like, oh, how deep can we go? Now it starts to be fun. It's like, it brings like this aliveness. And so, I'm just kind of reflecting in real time. It's really refreshing to hear that.
Well, thank you. What just came to mind is, imagine you've seen like the deck of cards that are like question starters or like intimacy questions, and Katie got me a pack of those maybe 3-4 years ago for a gift, and this is how I interpreted the game originally. It was like you pull a card, you answer the question, you pull another card, you answer the question. We've like rarely ever gotten 2 cards pulled. It's pull one and then just download everything as deep as we go. Like tangents are great. Like that's how I operate in my own mind. And to be able to have that expressive person coming back at me with the same thing, that's made everything happen or possible in this relationship.
Yeah, I can so relate. My partner and I are very similar. Like even, it's a longer backstory, but initially when we met, I got friend zoned. But then we would have like 4-hour phone conversations. I've never talked to anybody on the phone for 4 hours. I'm like, how do we not run out of things to talk to? And it's the same thing. And almost to a fault sometimes, where early on in our relationship, we would just like, dissect everything, integrate everything. And it's like, oh, how does that feel to hear? And it's like, oh, how is that to share? And like, what's happening for you? And is there impact? And just like, playing this game, but we're both a little sick and twisted, which is like, depth. Like that's, I think you need the play and the lightheartedness and like the joy, but it makes life so much better, so much sweeter. That's super cool. Okay, so I want to get a little bit into your story, because part of the reason you're here, part of the reason you're on this podcast is we went to this men's retreat together about a month ago. And you were assisting, and we didn't really have many interactions during the retreat. And then the final day, the last minute, we started to talk, and we had like a connection point on a share. And then all of a sudden we realized how many things we had in common. Like from our story, athletics, CrossFit, competitive CrossFit, being, fitness coaches, mindset, and then now we're obviously like, we were at that retreat, like doing the work, like wanting to show up as better men, wanting to learn about men's work, being surrounded with other guys. And even a reflection for you on this podcast is it's really cool reconnecting again, because I can just feel like you just have this calm presence, and just like this a big thing for me walking away from that retreat was like the embodiment of like I love learning. I'm a lifelong learner, and I've done so much like intellectual. And part of the reason I desired that was like, how does this like shift internally, like in our tissues, in our cells? And like, it's just as soon as we got on, I like feel this grounded presence. I'm like, oh yeah, this is Gunnar. Like and there's something about that retreat where, like, I don't know, it feels cliche, but I feel like I walked away with all these brothers, and there's just something that my closest people in my life like won't get, and I don't even try to explain, and then I can just like feel that, and I feel this like also reciprocal where I'm like, oh yeah, like Gunnar gets me, in a way that a lot of people don't. And so yeah, it's really cool to just realize like how similar our paths were, even a program called the Strong Coach, some similar mentors. Like that was my first kind of business development program. I was a fitness coach. A lot of my listeners know that. Got into mindset, into life coaching, into leadership, into now men's work. And you've had like a similar path. So I'd love to just kind of hear more of your story, and we can just kind of jive off of our stories.
Yeah, I love it. All right, so I'll back up to like high school. So I played 3 sports in high school and went to an extremely competitive and also extremely supportive school. So I left my hometown to go to a different high school. It was an all-male school, which now I've reflected on the last couple months of like, oh, that's when the men's work started for me. And every year, every couple months, it's now developed to where it is now, and why we're having this conversation. So in high school, I had a lot of awesome coaches that were demanding. They were fair, even though a lot of times I may have disagreed with it because I was 15, 16, whatever. But it taught me how to show up and be really consistent, and also reflected on, if I want something, it's up to me. And getting clear on my purpose, getting clear on my principles, my morals, all of that was founded in high school. And what it led me to is I went and played college hockey for 2 years, and I was basically thrown out of that super supportive system into a place that talked a lot of it, but never showed it. And that's no one's fault. It's absolutely just me, like, getting that opportunity to learn what the world is like. So I went into college hockey, was training on my own. I was the youngest player on my team by a couple years when I first entered. And in that time period, I was coaching some people, but more so just like, hey, come work out with me. I'll teach you how to do some things, and we'll get strong, right? That was kind of the initial thing. And then that developed into me finding CrossFit, watching the CrossFit games in a hotel room when I was at a hockey camp preparing for the next season. And for whatever reason, the intuition bell rang again, and this is what I'm going to do. And I still had college hockey in front of me, but I knew CrossFit was something I was going to pursue. It ended up being, I transferred schools, got into a new program, was introduced to a CrossFit gym by a mutual friend of mine that summer in between. And the first day at the gym, the 2 coaches or head people there had no idea who I was, thought I was just some, little hockey kid running around trying to do dumb stuff. And they're like, all right, what is your purpose for being here? And I had this call, didn't even think about it, just said, I'm going to go to the CrossFit Games. And of course that's received poorly.
Yeah, by the way, for people who don't know, that's like everyone who steps into a CrossFit gym has that desire, because it's a new enough sport. So it's like, oh yeah, of course. And like as a coach, you're like, okay, here we go, another one that thinks you're gonna make it. But I know, we'll continue with your story. You did get very competitive and competed at a really high level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I came into CrossFit out of hockey, never touching a barbell. So I had to like really go to the nuts and bolts of figuring everything out. However, I had a trainer in high school who like valued body weight stuff. So I could do handstand push-ups, I could do pull-ups, I was a good runner. I had a base of fitness that was really good. But man, I was so far behind on, the sexy lifts and all that stuff. But I'm really proud of that progress. So coming back into it, like I go to the gym, they call me out, they make me do Fran the first day. And that day I did it in 11 minutes and 40 seconds and was dead, right? And I continued showing up. And I think that's a big thing for me, is just how consistent I am in that process. Fast forward 5 months, I retire from hockey. 10 days later, start the 2015 CrossFit Open, and was fully in from that moment. Got my level 1 that weekend, started coaching a month after that, or most of shadowing. And then in a couple months from there, did Fran again in 2 minutes and 14 seconds. So, yeah, quite the change in a very short period of time. But the underlying thing for me is I've always given more to other people than I maybe gave to myself in those early years. As hard as I was training, I would do anything to help the people in my classes, to help my family, to do whatever that was. And that led to a lot of heartbreak in a couple of years where I missed regionals by 2 places. And, that's like 3 seconds on a workout. And a lot of self-reflection came from that, and the moment of inflection was, the only thing that I'm missing is my mindset and developing that. And I was fortunate enough in that time frame as well to be in school, coaching full-time, training full-time. Like, my life was very full and compact with 3 things. So I started pursuing all these different mindset things, and at the same time was coaching 3 young women. They were high school athletes. They all came into the gym with their own unique story of struggle, of disordered eating, being put on medication and all this. And the time that I got to spend with them, I realized how powerful my coaching presence is when I'm in the relationship with them. Like, I can be someone they can, just dump whatever they're holding onto me, and being a rock for them. And so I started really studying, like, how can I support them better emotionally, spiritually, mentally, because they're already getting the physical stuff. Like, they went from, chronically injured to being fittest in Minnesota, as teenagers. Like, that's an amazing feat in a short period of time. And I was like, what made the difference for them? It's like, they have the personality that they're going to go to the gym, they're going to spend hours there, but what are they getting inside their mind and in their soul that allows that to continue, right? So those 3 women, they're now just fantastic examples out in their communities. They're all over the country. I reflect on them, like, at least weekly, probably every day. Like, that's where I got this start into coaching people's spiritual, emotional, mental development, and then continuing to pursue that while I was in school. It took me 7 years to graduate undergrad, whatever. A lot of people go to school for 7 years, and most of them are doctors. But, I'm at this point now where it's like, all right, I've coached hundreds of people. The biggest difference is how I can relate to them and then show them different tactics to improve how they relate to themselves. Because I think that's all it is, right? Like, me and my now marriage is, how am I relating to me, and how am I then showing up for her, and vice versa. So the relationship, the emotional, the spiritual, mental piece is where I am now, and that's what I'm coaching people on.
So I want to dive into a little bit. You mentioned, giving more of yourself to others rather than yourself. I'm curious, how that manifested. What was that process like of, like, creating awareness? And then what was it like for you to to just focus on yourself, to prioritize yourself? Like, was that hard? Was it challenging? I don't want to put words in your mouth. You didn't necessarily say people pleasing, but I know that tendency, or like not having boundaries, is something a lot of people struggle with. And I think for a lot of different reasons. And like sometimes it feels selfish, especially if that's like our way of operating. And it's like, sounds like you went through this identity shift. And so I'd love to just hear more like that process. Like, how was it for you? How were you able to like actually make a change? Because I think there's a difference between the awareness. Some people become aware of things that they want to change in their life, but then it's like, okay, how do I actually like do something different?
Mm-hmm. Whew. It's a really good question. So I don't necessarily relate to the people pleasing, but I definitely relate to being more on the perfectionist side, wanting to have everything that I touch be as good as possible. And in the CrossFit competitive side, like 2017, 2018, I was lifting weights that were competitive at the top of the games. I was able to do workouts at super high levels and hit these times. So it's like the metrics were there for me to go, okay, I should be able to do that. What was happening was like the CrossFit Open, I was so focused on every person in the gym having the best experience that when it came to me doing a workout, I had 45% of what I could give. And so maybe that is a people-pleasing thing. I can spend more time on that next week, look into that more. But the idea of like, I care so much about the success of others around me that my capacities also grow within myself. So I know that because I helped this woman get her first pull-up, that helped me go 5 seconds faster on Diane, right? Like having those wins, just stacking all the time for other people, getting to share that with them, is really uplifting and at the same time emotionally intensive when it's stuck in that same time frame. So I would get to the Open and already be emotionally spent, and that was the difference at the time for me qualifying. So having that self-reflection going, okay, I am serving these people really well. I'm not serving myself fully in the way that I want to show up, the way that I set my goals when I first walked into the gym, right? I know I can do it. What's in the way? And it was 100%. I wasn't at the time aware of how much energy I was expending emotionally, spiritually, mentally before doing the physical practice or physical act. And what came from that was, one, I talked to my team, my family about like, okay, if I'm going to do this, this is what I need, and these are the boundaries I'm now going to have to set. So from 2018, the last year regionals, I finished 42nd in the Central Regional, most competitive region in the world. So it's like crushing, but at the same time, like, I'm right there. I'm right on the edge. The Open's not something I'm great at, being 5'10", 205 pounds. That's what it is. I've made the commitment. 2019, I ended up just putting way more energy into how is my mental game, how am I breathing, how am I journaling, how am I doing all these things outside of the gym. And what led from that was I qualified for 3 of the sanctionals because they changed the structure that year. Competed at 1 on a team in the pro division or whatever they called it, and then went to France 3 weeks later and did the French Throwdown as an individual. And all of that happened at the same time that I had an injury where I could not squat leading up to the competition for 3 months. So what separated me in that time was I was so mentally sharp and aware of the energy I was taking in and aware of the energy going out. Take a breath. So in that time frame, 2019, like I went from, missing by a spot to qualifying consistently. And then COVID hits, and I stopped training for 4 months, stuck in Minnesota. Everything was shut down. Eventually got myself a 70-pound kettlebell that I could just do goblet squats with. And then I moved to Tallahassee, Florida with Katie. She was starting grad school. And in that shift too, I made another boundary of I'm not going to coach in a gym because that is no longer the energy aligned with my goal. That's too much going out. I really want this. I can still be an inspiration, and then start my own coaching business to supplement that. So moved to end of 2020, qualified for semifinals 2021 and 2022, and I know that was all possible because of the boundaries I put on where my energy is going. So at the time it was relationship, coaching, online, and then training. So every time I was in the gym, it was my time. It wasn't answer the phones in between sets. It wasn't, pick up other people's bars and stuff. It was about me, and that taught me a lot about just committing and being fully into my goals. So that was a long way to go about it, but thank you for that question.
I have a few threads. One, did you do Wodapalooza in 2019? Was that one of the sanctionals?
I was there, but it was team of 3. Yeah.
Team of 3. You were on a team of 3?
Yep.
That's, just small world. I was living in Florida at the time, so 2019. I don't think I competed in 2020 at Wodapalooza. This is just my own fun little curiosity. Yeah. Were you a team of elite? Or
we were RX team of 3, and we finished. We got 3rd place, so gotcha. we were really successful.
Yeah. So at the time I went to CrossFit Waterside. So Cassidy Lance McWhirter. I think she competed. I think that was last year she competed. So I had a bunch of friends. I had some. I think they did elite, but that was my first experience at Wodapalooza. So yeah, just funny we were in the same area at that time. So a couple of things. One, for people that don't know, coaching CrossFit can be one of the most draining things. You coach 4 hours a day and it feels like 10. It's like you're performing, coaching 3 classes in a row can be really, really challenging because it's like you're trying to give the same energy to every single person, but it's the same thing. It gets repetitive. It gets challenging. And I remember when I was coaching CrossFit full time, I lost. I wasn't even competing super competitively at that point, and I just didn't want to work out. I'd get done coaching classes, and I'm like, I want to go somewhere else. But this was also my place, my me time. So I can definitely resonate and relate. As far as the boundaries, was that challenging at all? What did that process look like? Obviously, it was probably a little bit. Or I imagine it was easier, moving to Tallahassee, where it's before getting there, you're okay, I'm not going to coach. But while you were still coaching, how did you navigate that? Because this is something that I find so many people struggle with. Like I said, there's one step of identifying the boundaries, but then it's actually following through and communicating that. Was that challenging at all for you? Or maybe on the flip side, it was relieving just to communicate that.
Oh, that's again, you're getting all the right things there. The biggest challenge for me was coming out of 2019, being really successful as a competitor, and as soon as the season sort of ended, it was right back into getting everything that I could into every class. Right, it is super draining, and I remember we had a coach leave the gym, and I ended up taking over his morning classes, which I'd never done. I'd always coached 9:30 a.m. often until 8 p.m. Right? It was 2 classes, train for 2 hours, coach a class, train for 2 hours, and all of that energy was there. which this just came to my mind. I imagine at some point during your CrossFit coaching career, you didn't eat lunch for a long time, because that was my story. It's like a perfect bar and a Fit Aid 7 days a week for lunch, and you're like, oh, I'm fine. That's 400 calories. Whatever. That's an aside. But I was so committed because I was like creating my own programming for some specialty classes. I was coaching private training. I was coaching CrossFit classes, and then doing my own training in between all that time and going to school. And it was really difficult at first to go, okay, this worked. How am I going to replicate that again and set these boundaries? And then I think the blessing of the year of 2020 was it allowed me to detach from the physical gym and really understand where I'm spending my time, which is an ongoing process even to today. But as soon as we moved to Tallahassee, I had already made a decision. I'm not going to work in a gym again. So, as you make those boundaries and you say that for yourself, you get tested. We went to 5 gyms, I believe, in Tallahassee, and I got approached in every gym if I would like to coach. And because I had already set that for myself and practiced it on the 5-day drive or whatever it was with the U-Haul, I was like, I'm not going to coach in a gym. I'm not going to coach in a gym. And as soon as I was asked it every time, it was pretty simple. It was like, no, I've set it for myself. I'm not going to coach in a gym, but I appreciate the offer. So that wasn't as difficult because I had the reps in beforehand and had already decided, like, the reason I'm moving is to do my own thing. And part of doing my own thing is competing and making it as far as possible in that realm. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I think with the boundaries, it's like identifying it. This is like most things in life, but like speaking it out loud, sharing it with people, like makes it more real and has a level of personal accountability where it's like, oh, I said that to that person. I'm going to be impeccable with my word. And that's what's so valuable. Like, even I think back to our retreat and like the things that are shared. It's like, okay, I shared this with this group, like change is going to happen because I said it. I don't need accountability on everything because it's like, I spoke this to the group and it's like real. And, sometimes people like, I imagine, or I know I've done it where I maybe don't share something. I'm like, I probably shouldn't do this anymore. And then it's like, I don't say it. And then it's easier to like slip back, And also it sounds like you had a really clear why, again, going back to like your purpose and like what you want and what you desire and what you want to create. Which are just some things that I've gleaned from what you were sharing around like having these boundaries. And so I can see how then the implementation, like, sure, is still challenging, but it's like, okay, this is so important. Like, this is who I want to be. And these are part of the steps, just as important as training of getting me there. So I want to dive into mindset a little bit. Do you know Mark England? Have you done Enlifted?
I've done the Enlifted athlete program. Okay. Yeah, I don't know him personally, but I know a lot of people in that community.
Nice. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I was wondering. I've done the Enlifted Level 1. I did it in 2020, and obviously the Strong Coach connection and mindset is a big part. So yeah, I want to hear like your framework for mindset. For me, a little bit of a similar but different thread. I went through the Strong Coach when I was working a desk job, and the desk job was like, wow, I don't know how I survived like 9 or 10 months of that. It was just like having coached my entire career, and like as much as CrossFit has its challenges where it's like you may coach 7 classes a day, but that's across a 12-hour period, so to your point of like not eating or like just these weird hours, then to go into like, oh, you have to be in this place at this desk for 8 hours was like, so hard and challenging. And then going through the Strong Coach in 2019, a big focus of that was personal growth, personal development. And I started to question, like, what did I want? Like, what was holding me back? And even to your point, with these clients and with yourself. It's like, okay, you know, you had the physical capability, but like, what is that next level of unlock? And for me, it was really soft talk. It was, I would say things like, oh, I think I'm going to start my own online business, or I'm going to try and start my own online business. But even when I say that, you know, it's likely you don't trust me. You don't believe me. You're like, yeah, sure. Is Taylor going to do it? And I realized as I became aware of this language around mindset, I actually, two things. One, I didn't believe I could do it. You know, at the time I imagined, like, this was really before training camps were a thing, but like training think tank was probably like, or Invictus were like maybe the biggest things where I was like, I want to do something like that. I want to do online coaching. I want to work with high level athletes and like have like this team and maybe other coaches. But I was like, who am I? Who am I to do that? So there's one, the lack of belief. And then two, I was giving myself an out. So if I failed, it's like, oh, well, I just said I was going to try. But energetically, that's no way to show up. You know, it's very different than just, oh, if you say it like manifestation, where it's like, oh, I'm going to be a multimillionaire. And then you're just a multimillionaire. Like, I don't believe into that. But like using the language of like it and commitment. You've mentioned commitment, and I definitely want to dive into that after the mindset stuff, because it seems like a pivotal foundation for your life and who you are and how you show up. But it was shifting that language to, I am going to start my own online business, and I'm going to go full in because that's the only way really to show up. And then once I did that, that change was all of a sudden clients just started reaching out to me like, hey, I need to hire you. And I'm like, what? I just started this, you know, thing. And then fast forward a little bit, I moved back to Colorado from Florida, was fully doing the online coaching thing. And then it almost felt like I was this, what's the word? Like religious zealot, where I'm like, this mindset stuff changed my life. I'm like, you got to hear about this. You got to learn about this. Like, I'm just telling everyone. And so with my fitness clients, I just started doing it. I started doing mindset calls, goal setting, for free. Like, I wasn't charging extra as part of their package. And then after a couple months, their results were 10x. Like, it blew my mind. I was like, what is happening? And I think anybody who has spent time, even if not in the fitness industry, if you wanted to like get in better shape or lose weight or eat better, you know you need to work out more, or you need to eat better, or you need to like cut out fast food. But it's like, why don't we do that? And so the shift for my clients was they had a clear understanding of like what they wanted, why they wanted it, and then they had tools to do that. So that was like my big thing. Then got into Enlifted, and Mark has been on the podcast, and that's a big way that I talk about mindset. And that was just like the catalyst to like, the more I did that, I'm like, well, this fitness stuff is cool, but there's a lot of great fitness coaches, and this is like the deeper unlock. So yeah, I'd love to hear like, what is the process for you working with clients and maybe even yourself to unlock the mindset, and what does that look like, and how do we tap into that deeper layer of like, not just, last thing I'll say, I'm passionate about this stuff, so I'm starting to talk a lot. I think the big thing I see with mindset, because it's such a buzzword, is like, oh yeah, growth mindset, think happy thoughts. And there's like the intellectual, but going back to like, how does that land in our system of like, that's a way of being, like that's a way of operating. So I said a lot of things. Feel free to like take this in any direction that feels alive.
Oh, well, I'm stoked to hear that you've done Enlifted and that you have that base as well. So that also means your audience has also heard of it. So I can do my best to relate it. I believe mindset is like, if we were to boil it down, and the last thing there is, it's the story we tell about our life. And that shows up in single words at stressful moments. It also shows up as judgments when we're at peace. So, you know, if I'm sitting, I have a day to just read a book, and I make a judgment like, you're being lazy, you should be doing stuff. That's how my body is going to reflect that to the world, right? Like, so the story is everything and it's nothing at the same time. So if we can understand what stories are being told, what language that we're using, maybe it's in the gym, maybe it's at work, maybe it's trying to find a partner in a relationship, whatever you're saying to yourself about that certain thing, that is your mindset. And when we can come back to it as, all right, I'm hearing you as a coach. I'm hearing my clients say something, and I go, hey, is this accurate for you? Is this true? And they can go, oh wow, I'm really telling some BS right now. And I don't pride myself on being like a word police or a BS catcher. However, I'm the mirror, and when my clients can start to see that and hear it back from what they're saying, change happens really quickly. And I love what you mentioned there of like your fitness clients started seeing like 10x results. I imagine some people were like 100x, and they're completely different because the physical actions, the physical achievements matched their internal environment. And that's where mindset shows up for me, shows up for my clients. I'm just compelled to share the story. I was having a conversation last night with the client, and the process that we've worked on for her started with like a lot of traumatic events in her life, and understanding what was coming at her. And at the same time, she had a goal. She's like, I want to squat 300 pounds. And it's like, those are some heavy things, right? We're dealing with physical weight, matter, and the emotional matter that is accumulating from all these stories, from all these, negative events happening to her. Negative can be a judgment. So fast forward to last week, she back squatted 305 for a double and gets on the phone call. She's like, oh, it wasn't that great. I go, you remember when you first set that goal? And the stories you were telling to yourself that you couldn't do it. And now you did it for a double on a regular training day, not really sleeping as much as you should. But because you've turned the internal structure from changing the story, her whole life is different. And she has the capacities now to take on more weight in the gym and can deal with more emotional, spiritual, mental challenges that show up. So the way I help my clients is we get down to the stories, and then I'm going to fill the void or whatever is there with skills to help process all these things. And I imagine you do very similar things, and that, it's very fun to have more coaches in this realm. So
yeah, I love that. It sounds like very similar. Like it really is just the story you tell yourself. And it's like we often suffer more in imagination than we do in reality. And I think that it's also like just part of us. Like we all do this. It's not like you mentioned a judgment. It's not like a good or bad, or it doesn't necessarily make meaning about who we are as a person, but like when we can separate the emotional charge, and even what you said of being the word police, it's I'll have to send you this meme. I think Lifted posted it, but it's like it's, you've probably seen it. People have done so many variations where it's like a husband and wife laying in bed, and she's like, oh, she's probably thinking about, or he's probably thinking about, another woman or something like that. And he's like thinking about language, like soft talk or words or whatever, and
maybe it's possible.
Right?
It's like,
yeah. And it's like, I sent that to all my clients because they know, and this is everyone that I work with, one-on-one clients, leadership clients, my men's group. Like I share this mindset module that I have because it's really the foundation of like shifting. Like it's, and that's what I love about what Mark teaches is it's like actually a practical tool to mindset, through the language. Whereas again, a lot of the stuff that I see out there is, oh, just focus on the good, like, be positive or, whatever. And it's like actually bringing awareness. And so I'm the same way where I share with my clients. I'm like, I'm going to lovingly, like once I let you know, I'm going to call you out, and also feel free to call me out because I am guilty as well. I say I'm a recovering, soft talker. But it's so funny once you're aware of the language people are using, and my audience is really familiar with it. You notice it everywhere. Like you notice in other people, and you can start to I mean, it's then creating more stories, but you notice when people are like using maybe kind of sort of like, hey, what do you think? Maybe they doubt themselves, or they're afraid of like how you'll respond or whatever. And we change that. And it's just funny, even in that story, how something that seems so far away, that we desire, then when you do it, it's like, oh, that still wasn't good enough, you know? And so having, I think that's why everyone needs a coach or a mentor or a teacher in some capacity, because some of the time it's not what either that you or I am great or this like amazing person. We're just like objective. Like we don't have an emotional charge to the story, so like we can see it and help that bring that to light. So yeah, super cool. I imagine you and I could nerd out for hours on this stuff. But the last thing I want to dive into is this word commitment. We talked about that a little bit before we started recording. You've mentioned it a handful of times. And you occur to me as someone who is very committed. Like when you choose something, when you decide, okay, this is what I'm going to commit to, you follow through. And so I'm just curious, like, one, what does that word mean to you? Commitment. And how has that shown up in your life? Like why is that so important to you?
It's somewhat difficult to answer because it is such a big idea.
I was going to say, super simple question.
Yeah. And it makes me again reflect to like who I was when I was 10 years old, right? Like I had this innate sense inside me of whatever I'm doing, I want to be fully in it. And where that's somewhat evolved is like commitment also means like, where's my presence? Where am I focusing my energy? Where I put my attention is where I have my intention. And commitment then is, all right, if I want abundance in my life, can I then focus on me being abundant? So the commitment there is to myself. And if I want to have a loving marriage, that commitment it has to go inward first. So, you know, I'm 10 days into being married, and at the same time, I feel the sense of having been married since day one to Katie, and now it's, you know, officially in a book somewhere, you know, for legal matters, language stuff right there. Matters. Okay, so that commitment though is like, as soon as I show up with someone, that's where I am. As soon as I say I'm going to go work out, can I follow through on it? And that commitment, it starts with the smallest thing and it allows the biggest thing to happen. So, I mean, commitment it's everything in the same way that mindset is everything. So, Am I telling a story that's taking me away from what I want? And is that challenging my commitment that I've made? So integrity starts to come into that as well. You know, all right, I say, just use the gym example. Like, say I want to back squat 405 pounds this week. I'm not going to do that at home because I only have a 45-pound bar. Right. So it's like, okay, what do I have to do to get to that commitment? And as soon as we're clear and strong, solid with what we're going after, commitment is actually quite easy. It's everything that gets murky, that's distracting, that commitment, you start to doubt yourself. So I'll pause with that because there's so much to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. What's coming up for me is it's like this conscious like intentionality around the thing that you want, and like even the word agreements is coming up. And I think about, you know, again, back to the men's retreat, when we started, we all made agreements of like how we're going to show up, how we're going to interact with each other, like the integrity we're going to have, you know, within the group. And then also there's this idea, which this connects to mindset, is like we have agreements, I believe subconsciously, that are playing out that don't serve us anymore, like about who we are or how we're supposed to operate or what we expect from other people. Or like boxing ourselves into being like, oh man, I'm the person who like always shows up for other people. Like that could be an agreement until you decide like, no, that's actually not serving me. I'm going to make a new agreement or a new commitment, And so I think it sounds similar. I think agreements and commitments are a little bit different, but what I'm hearing from you, or like what's coming alive, is that the commitment is this like dedicated action. It's like this decision of like, okay, this is how I'm now going to operate, which something this was last summer. I probably spent like 6 months really like sitting with the idea of freedom. Like, what does that actually mean? And what I came to the conclusion of was that a lot of times we think of freedom of like, oh, do whatever I want, free flowing, there's no rules, like, and actually I think the more that we have freedom, the more constraints there are. It's this idea of like discipline equals freedom, where it's like, if you don't have a boundary, it's so easy to like go outside of like who you want to be and how you want to show up. But when you have a strict boundary, when you have a path, it's very clear, like, okay, is this how I want to operate? And then when you fall off the path, it's like, okay, I can recenter, And so what I'm hearing from you with this commitment, it's like, once we get clear on that and we decide, it's sometimes maybe simple, not easy, where it's like, oh, is this in alignment with my commitment? No? Okay, cool, I do this thing. But then that's where like it can still be challenging, because it's, maybe tough decisions of like not spending time with family or friends, or, not doing something that feels really good, like, I don't know, going out on a Friday night when you have a big training session the next morning or whatever, but it's like, cool, what are you committed to? And also I think it's understanding like we can only have so many like deep commitments, or maybe there's like degrees of like what we can and can't commit to, and being honest about that allows us to honor our commitments. But with that being said, I'm curious if you have any thoughts or suggestions for people who struggle with committing, because I feel like that is a struggle for a lot of people, whether it's committing to themselves, following through. Like, how do I follow through? How do I, do the thing that I say? And I imagine I already know what you're gonna say, but something that comes up for me is like the stories. I know I have a specific client I think about who we did a lot of story work. Where there was a fear of failure, like deep inside her, that went back to childhood. And so because of that, she actually self-sabotaged. Because if I don't start, if I don't go to the gym, well, then I can't fail at losing weight if I just don't actually go, So, to be more concise with my question, like how can people support themselves better with commitments, or what might be holding them back, or how would you help, a client who is struggling to follow through?
I'm actually going to use something that you mentioned like a minute ago or so, is like creating structure in a way that I've been introduced to it, and especially in like men's work or creating like sacred space, is the idea of a container. And what is the container that I'm operating within? I love getting into this story work around kingdoms and queendoms. Like, what is your domain? And knowing the edges of your domain is basically understanding your container. Where do I operate within? Because in that idea of freedom, or maybe lacking commitment, is like, I can do anything, I can turn around, I can do all this stuff all at once. But in reality, we don't have the capacity, we don't have we haven't developed the energy, because we haven't spent enough time tight. We haven't been in that tight container long enough to understand, okay, we can push the edge out an inch, and then the next week we maybe go 2 inches, and then in 10 years from now, your life is unrecognizable because you spent so much time focusing on just improving one thing, being committed to one thing, rather than the totality of life's possibilities, right? Like, our imagination is extremely powerful. Can we shrink our container that we operate in right now? So for me, before doing this podcast, like, clean off my desk, so there's less distractions, less things that my mind's going to go to. So this container is you and I. Like, I'm enjoying this so much because I understand where I'm operating within. So we do have those opportunities. Like how can you then grow your commitments or the size of your commitments? I think it's simple. Like, okay, today I'm going to have this conversation. Taylor and I are going to be really present with each other. I'm committed to that. And when that's done, where's the next thing that I can put my attention? And admittedly, perfection or chasing perfect is a negation in itself. So if I'm trying to be perfect, that means that there's a limit to what I can do or who I can be, because that's in my mind. If I let go of perfection, I'm no longer limiting myself, no longer negating myself within that realm. And I can't fail because perfection's no longer the outcome, right? I'm being present, I'm being right now. This is perfect. There are a billion things going on outside of this conversation. This is all that matters right now.
I love where you took this. The idea of the container is so powerful, and I think that we can't do this alone. We're not meant to live life alone, and the challenge can be, finding the right group, or like creating boundaries around like who do you spend your time with. Like the container, it's you familiar with John Berardi, Precision Nutrition?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he has I used to have Precision Nutrition certification, but he made up Berardi's third law. If it's in the house, it will be eaten. And it's the same idea as like, okay, you want to eat better, like don't have options of bad food at your house. That's very simple, right? And setting up that container, whether it's like environmentally, whether it, like you said, cleaning the space, maybe putting a phone away that could be distracting, the people that you're interacting with, like, are they going to support you in this? Or are they going to hold you accountable? And yeah, it's like every time you do that, every time you honor a commitment, like you're flexing that muscle, you're like rewriting these stories. And so also I love this idea that it could be simple, like if you say, with your alarm, I mean, I'm pretty bad at snoozing. I actually set my alarm sometimes, not so much anymore actually, since I'm an entrepreneur, because I can kind of set up my day. But even as simple as that, it's like, if you said you're going to wake up at 7, are you going to wake up at 7? Like it could be the little commitments. And yeah, I really love this idea. I'm like still taking it in, and probably will be, of like, there's a ceiling on perfect, because it's like this self-created idea of what perfect is. And like, there actually could be something better out there, And so, yeah, what comes up for me is like, when I've had the strongest commitments, it's like sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly, I've created really strong containers, like the retreat we went to, the men's group. Like there was a lot of stuff that was coming up for me like a couple days before, like nerves, do I want to go to this thing? And it's partly because I know what I was committing to. I know deep down who I was committing to being and how I was going to show up and the vulnerability I was going to be. And that was the scary part, because I'm like, okay, we're going to, if I show up here, I'm going to play full out, but even too, like we talk about the CrossFit Open, like I used to try and get everybody to sign up. I think it's so powerful. And they're like, oh, I'm not going to win or whatever. Or it's like, I'll do the workouts, but I won't pay the $20 or whatever it is. And I'm like, well, you could go run a 5K, or you could sign up for a 5K race, and you're going to pull more out of yourself. And that's why I want you to sign up, because when you sign up and you know that you have to enter a score, and you know that Bob is entering a score, then it's like, you're just going to get that much more out of you. And it doesn't really matter how you finish. It's about, this container. So yeah, I really love that answer, and it's like got me just already thinking, and I will be thinking of like, okay, how can I create more containers, in my life, or structures, which I think really starts with like clarity on like, what are your commitments, like who do you want to be, and then it's like the next step of like setting that up to support yourself, setting yourself up for success.
I 100% agree. It's this is a story that was shared with me. That was a mixed word there. couple months back, or maybe a year ago now, is like in the coaching setting, I'll often start with like, what's your perfect day? Like, go through that exercise with the client. Like, I want you to write it all down and get as much detail as possible. And then they come back to me, they read it out, and my next question is that it? And then it's like, oh no, I could add this, I could add this, I could add this. Like we have, we place our own limitations on ourselves so often that it's, okay, where can I come back internal? Where can I spend more time with myself and realize, okay, where am I limiting myself? You know, where's the container maybe like facing the wrong direction? Like with the men's retreat, just curiosity, that was your first men's retreat in that style, right?
Yeah, really. It was my first retreat in general.
Wild, right? Like your life is forever changed because you committed to it and went into the container with there's 28 of us, right? That's so intimidating. I remember my first retreat was just about a year ago with Chris, and he read me like a freaking book. I walked in there trying to be so tough, like I'm the superior thinker, I know all the story work stuff, but it was all mental. And for me, he just walked right up to me and reflected. He's like, you need to open your heart. Your heart container is so small right now, but we know it's infinite. Can you lean into that for yourself and really explore that? And then coming into this most recent retreat, man, that was all I was there for. It was just like, can I let someone else dump whatever they need into my heart? Because I know I can withstand it, and I know I can withstand more than I've already taken in my life. So yeah, where is the containers? Where's your commitment to, you signed up for it, you're going, but where is the self-doubt or the playing small coming in? There's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, to your point, it's like, just, I remember signing up for this retreat, and it was like, that was a moment I felt a shift in my body because I chose that.
Yeah.
I paid, I signed up, I booked flights, and it's like, there's already integration happening. There's already shift happening regardless of what actually happens during the retreat, and I think that's where, I imagine for us it's similar, and so many people that I work with, it's like, for me, it started in the gym. It started with like, oh, I can push myself a little harder, like building confidence. Oh, I can overcome adversity, and that started bleeding into more areas of my life. And it's like putting yourself in those situations, like whatever your heart is, whatever your, because it's interesting with CrossFitters. Like my old roommate and some of my close friends have gone to the CrossFit Games on a team the past few years, and it's no slight on them, but the hard thing for them is not doing really hard CrossFit workouts, because it's challenging, and I don't want to take any of that away, but like they love that. The hard thing might be like, I don't know, speaking in front of a stage. Like we all have these different versions, so it's like where can you, what container can you find to put yourself like a little out of your comfort zone to develop? Like, I love what you said of like, I have this image of like, your mental capacity is so large, that container, but like your heart capacity was so small at that first retreat you went to, and then also like a big theme we've talked about is like, where can you put these mirrors in your life? Like asking for people that you trust, mentors, teachers, people close in your life who are going to be honest with you of like, hey, you're saying this, but this is what I'm seeing. Like you say you desire this, but like these are what your actions are showing, which is uncomfortable and really confronting, but like that's where the juice is. So yeah, man, Gunnar, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I'm curious if you have any last thoughts or words of wisdoms to close the thread on this conversation.
I mean, yeah, I'm super grateful for this as well. One thing that has helped me reframe my life and my mindset is every night before Katie and I go to bed, we say 3 things each to each other that we're grateful for from the day. And like manifestation it can be kind of a woo-woo term, which is also, that's something else. But this idea of like, okay, I finished the day, I create a container on, I was grateful today. And that has completely shifted my life. It's completely shifted our relationship and how we relate to our clients, because we're both online coaches. We both help people one-on-one all the time. And it's really easy to fall into the trap of being overconsumed with emotion, or, like, how do I process this? Can I say something that I'm grateful for? Is completely opened up my heart. And we're now 4 years. Yeah, we're over 4 years every day doing this practice. We together, Katie and I, are unrecognizable to each other then than we are now because of that. So if anyone can take that practice, please do it.
Yeah, that's super cool. And also that's like the compounding effect of, like, if you start today, you're like, what's really the change? You just got to start. You just got to start somewhere. And then 4 years from now, 8 years from now, 30 years from now. Yeah, super cool. So Gunnar, if people want to follow you, want to learn more about what you're doing, what it's like to work with you, could you share some of that?
Yeah, I work online. I help athletes, parents, entrepreneurs, military leaders get to the core of themselves so they can lead authentically and with calm confidence. So I do that, online, Zoom, phone calls, whatever it is. I also have a group course that will be relaunching in January, taking a little time after getting married to decompress. But that's an 8-week course, fundamentals of mindset and understanding how to address the stories that we have in our life. And it's just been an awesome opportunity for people to get in, maybe on a little bit easier entry point than like that full-on one-on-one commitment. So I'm online. My Instagram is at Gunnar Regan, Gunnar Gunnar, and I'd love to connect with anyone that related to these stories that we shared today.
Awesome, thanks. And I will plug all your stuff in the show notes for everyone that listened. But thanks so much, Gunnar.
Awesome. Thank you, Taylor.